Welcome to today's webcast on how to create a report with FLIR Thermal Studio. Jason Gagnon will join us here in a moment. Before we start, just a quick announcement. InfraredTraining.com is where you can go to see ITC's latest schedule for certification classes in the US and Canada. And for our fellow thermographers based in Europe, the Middle East, or Africa, irtraining.eu is where you'll find a list of courses in your region. And if you want to be notified of future webcasts, be sure to follow us on social media for the latest industry news, helpful tips, special training offers, and more. You'll find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So with that, here's ITC's Jason Gagnon with today's presentation on how to create a report with FLIR Thermal Studio.
During today's Thermal Studio session, I'd like to focus on three common functions of the software. First would be how to edit a thermal image from your library, measure temperatures, and save changes. The second would be how to edit and customize a template. And the third function would be how to generate a report from that edited template. But first, I want to do just to give a quick overview of the user interface. As you can see here, it's divided up into several different tabs. The Home tab contains some shortcuts to commonly used functions. For example, you can generate a new report from a template, an existing template. On the Home tab is also where you can find the settings for the software. Now, one thing you might want to take a look at right away is the regional settings. This is where you can set your preferred language, your preferred units for your temperature units, and your distance units. So this is independent of the camera setting. This is going to apply to any images that you edit and your reports and templates. Another thing you might want to look at is the overlay setting. So there's actually two tabs here that control the graphics overlay that you see on the color portion of the JPEG image. The File Explorer tab applies to images, individual images, as they're saved. So if you view an image in your File Explorer, this is going to control what it shows on the overlay. The Batch tab applies to the batch function specifically. So you can do batch jobs that will apply these overlay settings. So there's a lot of options here. You can go through all these different checkboxes and try different things and see what works best for you. But you have a lot of control over the graphics that show on that image. And then to close this out, we just hit the close button in the lower right corner of the window. The library is where you can access your images through your File Explorer. And we'll go through this in just a minute. The Reporting tab is where you can access your templates and all your report creation and template editing functions. Batch Processing is where you can create the custom batch jobs. There's a lot of options here as well. The Live tab is where you can connect to a compatible camera. You can connect in real time, and you can control the camera from this panel here on the left. And any add-ins that you purchase will show up as additional tabs. So there's a routing add-in, and then as new add-ins are released, they'll show here as their own individual tabs. So first, let's start out with the Library tab. So this allows you to access any folders, any drives that are on your PC, so you can find the images from your camera and you can begin editing those images. So on the left, if you're looking for a specific folder, you can obviously just browse here to your desktop, to your C drive, to any external drive. So it's just like your File Explorer that you're used to. So in this panel in the middle, you can see the thumbnail images. And then any sequence recordings will show up here as well. So you can play a recorded sequence from a camera, like a CSQ file, or a recorded sequence from, say, FLIR Tools Plus in Thermal Studio. So you can view that, you can play it back. So anything that's compatible basically will show up in this window. So I can double click on any image here to open a larger view. These arrows down in the lower left corner allow me to go image by image throughout my library folder. Of course, I can close it any time and go back to the library and pick a different image. The scale setting can be adjusted at the bottom of the screen. You can slide this back and forth. So there's these two small brackets that appear. This controls what we call the level and the span in the thermography classes. So the level is kind of similar to brightness. Span is similar to the contrast, thermal contrast. So by narrowing or widening the span, you can see how it impacts the image. It shows more or less detail. Okay. And as you make the adjustments, you can see that change on the left. So these numbers represent the minimum and maximum temperature for the scale. So if we make it too narrow, now we're seeing a very small window within that measurement range. If we make it too wide, we start to lose contrast. So we lose detail. So the important thing to remember is whatever the camera is set to, it doesn't necessarily matter. So you can auto adjust the camera, but then you can still customize that span in the software. So it's a beneficial feature. In the classes, we talk about focus range and distance as the three things that you got to get right in the camera. Pretty much everything else you can change in the software. So span is one of those things that you can adjust pretty easily. The other thing is the palette. Now the software has a list of palettes. It doesn't really matter what camera it's from. The cameras can vary a bit as far as what palettes they have. As long as it's a compatible thermal image, you can assign any palette to it from this toolbar button. And so you can experiment with different palettes, see what works best. Some show a little more detail, a little more contrast, like this Rainbow HC palette. This shows more detail with a given span than, say, an iron palette. So they can be analytical tools. There's no right or wrong palette. It really depends on your personal preference. And you know, in a case like this, Rainbow HC might give you the ability to analyze the image a little bit better. If you're looking at a very, very small temperature difference, the HC palette might help to kind of resolve an anomaly. But you can pick whichever you like. Another thing with the span too, if you double click in between those two brackets, it will effectively auto adjust the image. So if it's way off like that and you double click in there, it auto spans it. Okay. Another thing you can do here from the toolbar under this auto adjust control button is you can enable an auto adjust using a defined rectangle. So now I can move this window around and it will auto adjust, but only within that rectangle. And you can size the rectangle. So if you really wanted to focus in this case, these are two cups of water. Cold cup on the left, hot cup on the right. So if you really wanted to just focus in on this hot cup, get as much detail out of it as you could, we can narrow that window and have it auto adjust just within that rectangle. Okay. So if we auto adjust the entire image, it tries to include everything and show everything. But the advantage of auto adjusting in that rectangle is that we can limit it to just a certain region. And then if you want to close that out, just hit the X. It will go back to the auto adjust function. Another thing that we can adjust in the software is the fusion mode. So fusion is an algorithm that many of the cameras use today. It's commonly called MSX in the modern cameras, but there are several different fusion modes. And it's just, the differences in the modes just kind of define how it combines the two images. So with MSX, it uses kind of like an edge detection algorithm to overlay elements of the visual camera image onto the thermal image. And on this, if we toggle between thermal only and fusion, you can kind of see the outline of the cups. But to show a better example, look at something like this, which is a breaker panel. And now this image here is in MSX mode, so you can see a lot of text overlay on top of the image. That's from the visual camera. If we click this fusion mode button and switch over to thermal only, all that goes away because the pure thermal image doesn't show that. That's only because of the overlay portion, the MSX blending. But there are other fusion modes here that you can experiment with. The thermal fusion is kind of like a blending or combines them like almost like an isotherm. The thermal portion shows on top of the visual camera. So as we adjust the scale, you can kind of see less and less of that thermal image. We have a blending mode that kind of literally blends them together. Picture-in-picture mode shows the thermal image in this window that is adjustable. And then you could show the visual only. Now, one nice thing about the software, about this particular software, is that you can adjust the alignment of the fusion image here in the software. We've never really been able to do this. So if your images are a little bit out of alignment, which can happen sometimes, by enabling this, we can shift the alignment in the software. So this is a nice new feature that we definitely didn't have in FLIR Tools. Okay. So we move that around, try to get it lined up as best you can. Click the check mark here to close that and apply the setting. So if you need to adjust your alignment, just remember to go to the fusion mode, make sure MSX is picked, and choose the option to adjust that alignment. And you can adjust it using the other mode, or for the other modes, I should say. So even for the thermal fusion or the blending, you still have that adjust alignment checkbox. Okay. Now for temperature measurement, this image here has two spots on it. One on the cold cup, one on the hot cup. The software will show you whatever was saved with the image in the camera. If you've never edited the image before, it's going to come up and show you exactly how it was when you hit save in that camera. In this case, I have two spots on the image. It's set to the iron palette and the scale we talked about already. This is the initial setting for the scale, but obviously you can adjust that pretty easily. Now, the spot temperatures and any details about the image are going to show up on this panel on the right. So we have spot 1 and spot 2. There's some image details, min, max, and average. The parameters table is here, and some other settings a little further down about the camera, the image storage date, etc. So all that information showing in the panel. Now, the spot numbers that it shows, as we learned in the thermography classes, the accuracy of those numbers is dependent on your object parameters. Most importantly, your emissivity and your reflected temperature. So these are text boxes here. So these can be pretty easily changed just by backspacing, and you can just type a new emissivity, and it's going to change the entire image. So now the whole image is using 0.8 in this case instead of 0.95 to calculate those temperatures. So it's a good idea, if you can, to get it right in the camera, but you can always adjust it later in the software, any of these parameters. Now some cameras only have emissivity and reflected temperature, but regardless you have access to all of the parameters here in the software no matter what camera it came from. You can reposition these tools pretty easily. You can move the spots around. You can right click and you can remove a spot. You can add additional measurement functions from here on the toolbar. So you have several of the most common functions: spot meter, which we just deleted. This measures just a single point on the image. You have a line tool, which measures from point A to point B, so minimum, maximum, average temperature across the line. Rectangle measures min, max, and average within that shape. Ellipse is just an elliptical area, functionally the same as the rectangle. Delta calculates a temperature difference between two measurement functions. And this shows not on the image, but in the table over on the right. So just to the right of the image, you'll see a DT show up. And if we hit the gear button, you can configure that to use any of the measurement tools that are currently on the image. So we can choose spot 1 and maybe box 1 for this particular delta calculation. FLIR Tools has these, so there's nothing that different about how they work here in Thermal Studio. But Thermal Studio has two functions that FLIR Tools does not have. One is the polygon area. Now here with the polygon we can basically draw a custom area shape on the image. And so every time you want to change directions, you just click and it places a new node on the image. The shape, once it's on the image, is pretty easily adjustable. So this gives you the ability to trace any kind of weird shape, and it will kind of limit the calculations to just that strange odd shape that you drew instead of just drawing a box over some area. So it's a nice tool, and functionally, again, it works just like a box or an ellipse. Max, min, average temperature within that shape. Okay. So once it's on the image, you can, again, pretty easily point to any of these nodes here, adjust their position on the image. And if you right-click on any of the tools, you'll get a menu, unique menu for that specific tool. For the area shapes, you can enable the hot spot, the cold spot, enable the average, and this controls what's shown on the image and also in the table to the right. So if you don't want to show average, you can disable that. You can disable cold spot, hot spot. So you have a lot of control over how that works, what information is showing on the table. Now you can also use what we call local parameters for any of these measurement tools. So we talked a little bit about the parameters in the table to the right, emissivity, reflected temperature, and all those things that control how accurate your measurements are. So this, by changing it over here in the table, applies globally to the entire image. So everything will be 0.95 or 0.8 or 0.7, whatever you pick. By adjusting it here, we can set it locally. So if this area has an emissivity of 0.8 because it's looking at something with that emissivity, it depends on the material, we can select the checkbox, enable the local parameters, and then it will apply only to that area. And then you'll see a little tiny asterisk show up on the area to remind you that that is using a different emissivity from the rest of the image. So it's a powerful function if you're looking at a complex image with a lot of varying types of materials, different emissivities in that one image. You can customize the parameters for any of these measurement functions. Just remember to right-click, go to Use Local Parameters, and then it enables these text boxes. So you can set, say if this area is using a 0.5 emissivity, we can type that in just for that area, and then that calculation is going to be based on that new emissivity. Another thing you can do is create a duplicate copy of any of these shapes. So if you want an ellipse that's the exact same size, you can right-click on it and you can create a duplicate. There you go. So this is another thing that FLIR Tools can't do. Just right-click, create duplicate, and now you have a second area that's the exact same size. And that'll work with anything really, the area, rectangles, even the polygon shape. You can right-click and duplicate that. Another new feature is the magic wand feature. Now this will select a region of the image based on a certain tolerance that you can set over on the right. And it's temperature based. A lot of graphics programs have something similar to this where it's based on just colors. This is temperature based. So if you wanted to select a portion of the image that's all within the same temperature tolerance, right? The magic wand allows you to do that. And so by adjusting that tolerance slider on the right, you can see how it selects more or less of this region. So if you have enough thermal contrast and you really want to isolate certain areas of the image, instead of trying to just draw an ellipse and get it perfect, you can just click on that area, and then it highlights that region and that region. So might come in handy, might be something you want to try. Depends on the image and the temperature distribution in the image, how well it works. But an image like this, it works pretty well because I have a pretty well-defined hot region compared to the area around it, and the cold region as well. It's pretty similar, right? Another thing that we have here is the ability to create a line profile. So if we look at the toolbar across the top here, the very last button will show a profile graph. And this just graphically represents this line or any line that's on the image. The table on the right will show the min, max, and average across the line. This graph at the bottom shows how the temperature transitions across the line from point A to point B. And you can adjust the colors over here. Shows up a little bit better on the graph. And as you move that around, you can see that change. Another thing you can do here that we couldn't do in FLIR Tools is you can change the label for the measurement functions. So if I pick any of the tools, go to the table, I can change this to, say, hotspot or hot cup. And as soon as you change it in the table, it changes it on the image. So for any of the measurement functions, I can change that to be a little more descriptive than just SP1 or SP2. So while a lot of the functions are common between FLIR Tools and Thermal Studio, there are some unique functions like the ability to change the label and the profile graph, the polygon area, and the ability to adjust your image alignment, the fusion alignment, is pretty handy. Now, everything that we've done can be saved. That's an important thing. If you make a lot of changes, you want to make sure you save that so you don't have to do it all again. Down in the lower right corner, we have Save As. Save or Save As. Save will just overwrite the existing. Save As allows you to give it a new file name. Another thing you might want to take a look at is the notes and the annotations. So you have the ability here, using the note, to add a little text about the image. Some of the cameras can do this. So there'll be an on-screen keyboard and you can just type right into the text box. If you use that feature in the camera, it shows up in the note box here, right at the top. There's also a text annotations section a little bit further down. If you've used FLIR tools, you may have seen this. This allows you to get a little more specific with it. You can add a label and a value, so like an equipment ID or location, that kind of thing. And again, some of the cameras support this feature, so if the image has the text, it will show it here in this table to the right of the image. So, you know, you may open an image and see a list of text annotations, labels, and values, etc. If it shows up there, it means that it was probably saved that way in the camera or in some other software. Okay. The advantage of using the text notes is that you can tag the image independently of the report. So if you put a note in here, you know, maybe a problem evaluation or that type of thing, you can put that in the image, save it with the image, and then anytime you open that image, that text note will still be there. So it's not just in the report, it's actually part of the thermal image. Okay, so any changes that you make, there are some other functions across the toolbar here that you might want to check out, but those are just some of the more common things that people ask about as far as adjusting the image, measuring temperatures, editing your parameters, and saving changes. Okay. So I'm going to close this. We'll get back to our image library. Okay. So the basic workflow with the software, with any of the software really, when it comes to generating reports, first thing you typically would do is move the images from the camera, edit your images, make any adjustments that you want to make. If you've just started with the software, you might want to edit a template. So go into the Reporting tab. Remember, this tab is where you can find your templates. Anything that you've created so far will be saved in this area. This is also where you can find all of the report building and template editing tools across this toolbar at the top. So the software should come with several sample templates. So you can start with something right away without having to build an entire template from scratch. But even so, you might want to customize that a little bit. So anytime you want to make a change to a template, you can go to the Reporting tab. And then you can right-click on any of the templates. Okay. And on the right-click menu, it shows an Edit menu. And this will do just that. It opens the template for editing. Now, there's a lot you can do here. I'm just going to touch on a couple of real just basic things, but things that might save you some time in the long run. So the whole idea behind the template is you want to make it as unique as you can so you don't have to change the same thing over and over again. So one thing you might want to do here is set your logo image. It's pretty common to have a company logo, you know, maybe on the cover page or on the image page here, and you obviously don't want to set that every single time. So to adjust this, what we can do, since there's already a placeholder here in this template, we can select it, just click on it once. Then on the right-hand side, there's an area we can select logo image, and there's a down menu, and then we can click Browse. So this allows you to pick pretty much any graphics file as your logo. So I can use the ITC logo here, just open that, and then it puts it in place. Now if you want to insert a new logo onto the page, we can go up to Shared Image and click Insert Logo Image. Because we've already set the graphic, it will use that same logo. So that's the advantage of it. You can, by setting it once, every time you insert a new logo, it will use that graphic. So if you're editing a template or designing a new template or just making, you know, a new report, maybe you want to just place that on the page somewhere. So just remember to set it that one time. You can always change it. To change it, it's under the same menu. Just go back to Browse and pick a different graphic. So that's one thing you might want to take a look at. The tables that you see here, these are all customizable. This template just is set up to show all the object parameters, some file information, some camera information, and some measurement data. So you may not need to show all of this in your typical report. You know, for the parameters, you may only be interested in showing emissivity and maybe reflected temperature. So these other settings, if you want to delete these, the simplest way is to just right-click on the table and remove a row. And we can just keep doing that. So again, the whole idea here is to try to customize the template as much as possible. You can always add things later. So, you know, if for one particular report you wanted to show the external optics or like the distance setting, you can always right-click and add a row from any of these categories. So if you wanted to show distance, you can pretty easily add it. So it's all under the right-click menu for that particular table. Just right-click, either add a row or remove a row. You can also move items up and down. So if you want a distance to be closer to the top, right-click, move up, move down, set the order so it's the way that you want it. And that'll work for any of these tables. Now, if you didn't want a table at all, if you want to get rid of it completely, just right-click and remove table. So, you know, this isn't like Word in the sense that you don't have to put things in line with text. You can grab any of these tables, and so you can pretty easily, you know, delete a table, delete the contents of the table, or adjust the contents of the table. Now, let's say that you wanted to add a table. I'm going to clear out some of these just to make some room. Adding information is done from the toolbar at the top of just above the report. So all these different buttons allow you to add information to the page about the image. So there's a lot here. Since we're talking about tables, you want to take a look at this area here. So this is where you can add an empty table, which is just a blank table that you have to build up from scratch, line by line. More than likely, you probably want to use one of the predefined tables. This is broken up into different categories, like the parameters, which we see on the page, the geolocation, GPS data, camera information, text annotations, and stuff. So these are much easier to work with than just the empty table. But you have the option to do either. You may want to, try each, see what you like best. Here, let me delete this. So if you wanted to add a table to show temperature measurements, you probably want to put that somewhere on your template. We can go to predefined tables, go to measurements, and then just drag it to where you want it to go. So, you know, it's not like Word where you have to put the tables in line with the text. It's more restrictive. With this, it's very easy to just drag and move around the page. The white space just defines the kind of page the page layout, where everything's going to show up on that page. But it doesn't work like Word, where you have to arrange things in a more specific way. With this, you just drag it around until you have it where you like it. Now, the measurements table is going to be blank in the template, because this is a dynamic table in the sense that it's going to show what's on that particular image on that page. So if there's 2 spots, it shows 2 spots. If there's a spot in an area, it shows that. So it's normal for the measurements table to be blank in the template. Same with the text annotations. So certain tables will just be blank in the template. So you'll see when we generate the report that it will populate these accordingly. So adding tables is pretty easy, and you can always right-click on any of these tables like we did earlier. You can add a row. If you wanted to add more information to a table, it doesn't have to just be measurements. It can be other information. But the predefined tables are just broken up into some pretty common categories. All right. Oops. Here, yeah. So this is, again, just to recap, this is where you can access those predefined tables. You can also add a field, which is pretty much just like a single item, like a single cell of a table. So these fields are over here. So if you wanted to put a single piece of information someplace on the page rather than having it all bundled into a table, that's where the fields come in. So again, this is divided up into different categories. If you wanted to have your camera model, let's say, somewhere by itself on the page, you can add that. We can put it, under the image or maybe under the photo or something, and then that piece of information will show there just by itself. So you have that versatility with the software. Tables are the easiest thing to work with. They're easy to add, they're easy to change, but they're a bit restrictive in how they're formatted. The fields give you a little more flexibility in how information is shown on the page. All right. So, but just remember, it's all across the top here. You can go through these different buttons and try different things and see what works for you. The text box, so this is another thing that we see a lot on reports, where a kind of summary is given of the image analysis. What your findings are, what your recommendations are. It's commonly done using just a plain text box, and that is what this is. Okay. So we can put comments here, or overview, or whatever, and it's just a space that's left set aside so you can put in your own text. That's nothing more than that. But this text box will reserve that space so you can type into it. That's, again, going back to the differences between Word and this. With Word, you can just type right onto the page. With this, you have to define that space if you want to type text onto the page somewhere. So that's what the text box is for. So you just click on that, click and drag on the page. It defines the size, and then like the tables and some of the other tools, you can move that around pretty easily. Okay. So in a fairly short amount of time here, we set the logo up, we edited the tables, added rows, removed a table, I added a new table, I added a field, and added a text box. Okay. So you can do quite a bit without having to start a template just from scratch. You can start from one of the existing templates and then just tweak it a little bit, customize it for what you want to show in your reports. Now, another thing that we see a lot in reports is a cover page. This template here has just a single IR page, just an IR and photo. There's no front or back pages. But you can pretty easily add additional pages. If you look on the left at the bottom, there's a couple of buttons to add and remove a page. So if we click the plus, now we have a new blank page. We can move that up just by dragging it up or down. So now it's at the front, at the beginning. And so that is effectively our cover page. So now we can build that up, put the logo. So again, we go to Insert Logo Image. I already set that picture up, so it knows enough to go to that. Just put that right in the middle. To enter your information, maybe your address, your contact information. It's pretty much up to you how you want to lay this out. The font size for these text boxes is controlled on the right. So you can choose the font style, and this this pull-down menu here allows you to choose the font size. And you can add other pictures. So this, you have a photo button, and there's also like another shared image button. So there's a couple of different ways you can add graphics to the page. And that's all under this Insert Image section. You can also add arrows. Now in Word, there's a lot of options for this because you have arrows and you have all kinds of graphics. But here we have our own section where you can add arrows and shapes and things to the page. And this is handy on, particularly on the thermal image page if you want to correlate a problem on the thermal image with the photo. And you could have one preset in the template if you use that a lot. So we can pull this down and choose a double arrow like this. Now on the right, kind of similar to how the text boxes work, if you want to change the font, you got to go to the right. Same thing with the arrows. So this is where you can set the color. Okay. You can set the transparency level if you want to adjust that. You can also adjust the rotation. So it's a little bit different from how Word works. But you can set the rotation. Since we're in a template, we don't really know where it's going to be right now, so that's probably something you'd want to adjust in the report once it's made. So at this stage, you just set a size, set the color, and just put it somewhere so it's ready to go. So for each image page, you're basically just going to stretch it out and adjust it for that particular image. All right, so now I want to save changes, but I don't want to overwrite the existing. I want to be able to go back to that default template if I want. So I'm going to go to Save As, and I'm going to Save As Template. So this will prompt you to give it a new file name. Call it My New Template. Okay. Then it's going to put it into my template list, so I can now close this. And I can go to Previous, and now it goes back to that initial step in the reporting process. And now we have 5 templates. I have my 4 default templates, and then my new template. So now, there's a couple different ways you can create a report. One method is to start on the Reporting tab here, where you can see all of your available templates. So we started with just the 4 default templates. So this is the new one that we just created. We call it My New Template. That's the first one in the list. And we can see the preview over here on the right. So I want to use this template to create a new report. So I'm going to click on it so it's highlighted like it is now. Click on Select down kind of towards the bottom of that window. And that should take you to the next step where you can find the images and add them to the report. So I'm just going to select, I'm going to use the control key and just click on these couple of images here, and then drag them over to the right so it can build the pages. And so you can use the control key or the shift key if you want to select a group of images. You can drag a folder of images over, so it's just a matter of moving them from the center window over to the right hand side so it can add the pages. And then, as you can see on the preview, each page uses the same format that we designed in the template, just the images are unique and the data on the page is going to be unique. Next step will bring us into the report so we can begin editing it. Here's our cover page, right? And then this is the first thermal image page. Now, if we look at the table down here, the parameters show up here, camera information over here, and this is the measurements table. And I mentioned when we were editing the template that this is a dynamic table, so it's going to change depending on what's on the image at the time. So this image here has 2 spots and it has a line. So that's what you see here in the measurements table. Now, if you don't want to show the line, that's okay. We can change that. When you have the table selected, it enables on the right-hand side these check marks. So you can control what's showing in that table. So I can uncheck show line measurements and it gets rid of them. So you can uncheck other things if you just want to show spots and just choose to only show, say in this case, spots and deltas. And it won't show anything else no matter what's on the image. Now, some of these images don't have any measurements like this one. So if you want to edit an image and make changes to it, you can do that simply by double-clicking on the thermal image in the report. When you double-click on the image, it brings up the image editor. So this is kind of where we started earlier when we were editing the image from the library. This is where you can adjust your scale and your palette and all those different settings, and you can add and remove measurement functions. So I can go to here and maybe add a couple of spot meters, and then I can save the image and close it out, go back to the report page, and they show up on the image and on the measurements table. I just have to make some room, stretch that out a little, and there you go. So pretty much anything about the image you can change in the report. If I want to change your palette, you can do that. If you want to change the scale, you can do that. So all of these settings can be changed in the report on a page-by-page basis. Each page uses the same format, just a different set of images. So you can see how editing and customizing the template can be advantageous to you, because you can, before you start making reports, you can set the logo, you can set up the tables to be the way that you want them to be and show the information that you want to show in your reports. Try to customize it, make it as unique as you can, and then it gives you more time to analyze the images and look more closely at them. The reports can be saved pretty easily. We can just save as. So you always want to save the report just in case you want to edit it at a later time. We can go to Save As Report. And just give it a file name, save it someplace, just put it on the desktop. You always want to save it, and then you have the option to export it. So if you're sharing reports, it's pretty common to use PDF because anybody can open PDFs. You don't need any special software. But the PDF is kind of read-only in the sense that you won't be able to make any changes to anything about the thermal image in a PDF. So you always want to save it to the native report format, and then if you're sharing reports, export to PDF, or XPS is another common format. So you have either option available to you here. Now, another way to create a report is by creating a drag and drop shortcut. So what you can do is right-click on any of your templates. We call it a rapid report shortcut. So click on that right there. And it's basically just a desktop shortcut, which shows up right here. Okay. So now, if you want to create a report, instead of opening the software and creating the report that way, we can go through File Explorer, find the images. I'll just pick a bunch of images here, select those images, and then drag them out of your folder and drop them onto the shortcut. So what this does, it builds a report, so the end result's the same as what we had earlier, but it skips all the other steps. So you don't have to start the software first and select the template and go through all those different steps. It just kind of skips over all that and goes right into the report. And from here on out, it's the same. I mean, you can edit the images and do everything you need to do. It's just a different way, maybe a quicker way to get that report made. So if you have 50 images, you can just drag and drop them onto that shortcut and then just let it go from there. And it builds the report. You can arrange the pages too. You know, the page ordering is pretty easy to change that. It's just kind of dragging up and down, depending. If you want to move this up towards the top, we drag up. If you want to move it down, drag down. Pretty simple. This, not that, but this button allows you to remove a page. So if you don't care about this one, we want to delete that from the report, just click Remove Page. Simple as that. And you can add pages. So I can add a new page and then add a new page and then apply. If you wanted to add more images to this report, the folder is going to show on the left. So I can, you know, like we did earlier, you know, in the UI there, I can select the images and just drag them over to the page list. So it's the same exact thing. Now it builds the new pages and just kind of puts them in this existing report instead of making a new report. So it's pretty easy to arrange pages, to delete pages, and to add, you know, images to an existing report. And then you can save changes. You can always go back into the report at a later time and make changes. So that's how you can edit your images in the library, how you can edit a template, make some common changes to customize that template a little bit, and how to make a report using the software UI and using the Rapid Report shortcut. Thanks very much.
Before we wrap up today's webcast, just a reminder, if you want to be notified of future webcasts, be sure to follow us on social media for the latest industry news, helpful tips, special training offers, and more. You'll find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And of course, for the latest training schedule for certification in the US and Canada, head to infraredtraining.com. And for our fellow thermographers based in Europe, the Middle East, or Africa, irtraining.eu is where you'll find a list of courses in your region. Thank you again for watching today's presentation. We hope to see you online again soon. Have a great day.